Um, okay, we're back at BioIT World Expo. We did a panel last year on personal genomics. It was great fun. We had great feedback. And the fact you've all stayed suggests there's a fair bit of interest in this subject. So we have assembled a really fascinating and expert panel of speakers to provide some information and opinion, no doubt, on this subject. So to maximize the amount of time we have for discussion, I'm going to forget any preamble and simply introduce the panel. Starting on the far left as you look, Cliff Reed, CEO of Complete Genomics. You've just heard from him. Next to Cliff, Phil Riley, many strings to his bow, a clinical geneticist by training, a lawyer, and currently an entrepreneur in residence at Third Rock Ventures, which is the venture firm founded by Mark Levin of Millennium fame. Phil, thanks for coming. Dietrich Stephan, co-founder of Navigenics, one of the leading consumer genomics companies that's celebrating its first anniversary this month in terms of the launch of their direct-to-consumer service, the Health Compass. Next to Dietrich, Robert Green, neurologist at Boston University, and somebody who's really leading the field in terms of getting public opinions about the critical usefulness of genetic information. Next to Robert, back again from last year, John Halamka. We are incredibly grateful you can make it. John was in Washington, D.C. just yesterday, having spoken here on Monday, figuring out with the Obama administration how to spend $31 billion of your hard-earned money as part of the healthcare stimulus package.
Fast and wisely.
Of course, of course. That goes without saying if you're involved, John. And next to John, Jorge Conde, the CEO of Gnome. Some of your founders still call it Know-Me, but we'll call it Gnome.
Yes,
we'll agree on that? Okay.
Let's agree on Gnome.
I knew you'd be happy. So, Jorge, I'm going to start with you. For the people who may not know what Gnome does, you've been in business now for, well, you've been offering a service for over a year now, offering complete genome sequencing to people with more money than I have. But you've been, you know perhaps better than anybody what it's like to deliver whole genome information and gauge and see what the reaction is to people who've written you a decent-sized check. Try to sum up, if you can, in a couple of minutes, what that experience has been like over the last 12 or 15 months.
Sure, absolutely. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here this morning. So for those of you that may not be familiar with our company, we had the somewhat simple and we thought brilliant but potentially crazy idea that since we were eventually going to get to the point where whole sequence or whole genome sequence information was going to be reliable and cheap, based on the talk that Cliff just gave this morning, we thought that obviously once you move from one bottleneck, once you move from the sequencing bottleneck, the data generation step, research becomes a big component, and also interpretation of that data becomes a very important component. And as you sort of learn in Business School 101, when you remove one bottleneck, you create another one right downstream. And so our initial thought was, let's build a business, and let's build a company with the idea of working with individuals that will enable us to begin to think about what are some of the issues that are going to be around, that are going to arise around interpretation of all of this data. Now, it's a couple complicated steps because it's been pointed out many, many times before. There's a lot we don't know about the genome yet, and I think everyone in the room would recognize that, myself included. But also, there's an important question is how do you deliver this information in a responsible way and in a way that provides context and that can be digested by somebody or by individuals that aren't trained geneticists. Our idea was we want people to be able to understand their own information. We don't want to scare them. We don't want to mislead them. And we want to do it in a way where we're learning as well. So we launched our service in November of 2007. And we put the hefty price tag of $350,000 on our service. Now, by definition, when you do that, you are going to limit your market somewhat, as you can imagine. So we had the original idea that the first people that were going to come to us are obviously the people that can afford it, and they were going to be a very self-selected group, people that were fundamentally early adopters. And those are the people that were going to help us learn how to do this better. So we did that for some time. We managed to get some scale and get some expertise in how we do things, and we eventually dropped that price to just under $100,000, which is still out of reach for most individuals, but that gave us an opportunity to work with more and more people. And we can talk a little bit more about what the experience has been like for us, and more importantly, probably what the experience has been like for the individuals that have paid for that. But just to sum it up very quickly, I think that it's been a very educational experience for those individuals that have contracted us, and the evidence to me that at least we are starting off on the right step is that the majority of our business today comes from referrals from our previous clients. There's no question that we're going to get better at this. There's no question, obviously, that hopefully when, and not if, but when Cliff and his company and his team are successful, that we'll be able to do this for a far larger number of people. But our hope is that by the time that point is reached, we will have really become experts at how to do interpretation responsibly and how to do it well.
And before I forget, you have a current auction going on eBay, so anyone can get involved in this potentially.
That's right. So we partnered up with the X Prize, which, as many of you know, is sponsoring a Genomics X Prize, to do an auction, a charity auction for them for DNA Day, which was April 25th. So for those of you that didn't celebrate, it's not too late. The auction goes on for 10 more days. And you can go on eBay. It's www.ebay.com/DNA and check out the auction. Anyone can get involved.
So Jorge, you and John have many things in common, including partnerships with George Church. George is a co-founder of GNOME, and George is the founder of the Personal Genome Project. Right. And John, you are, as you mentioned last year, one of the founding first 10 in the
number 2. So
number 2 in the. You are not a number, but you are number 2.
That's right. So personalgenomes.org. Just click on the PGP10, look at number 2. You'll be able to get my entire phenome. You'll be able to get all of my 3-dimensional body photographs, clothed, and my entire sequence to date, as has George Church's delivered. And it's, of course, continuing to be expanded, posting new versions on a monthly basis.
So how much have you been sequenced, and what have you learned in the last 12 months?
Well, so about 5% of my exons are currently available. And it was a really interesting process, as you described. The data comes out. I then meet with genetic counselors, and those genetic counselors say, well, based on the interpretation, the data that we have to date, and I think you illustrated this is an evolving science, well, here are some things that you carry. So you have Charcot-Marie tooth type 4, a hereditary neuromuscular disease. You carry boy-in-a-bubble disease, the severe combined immunodeficiency. You're more susceptible to tuberculosis than the average human. You have a double average chance of the average male of getting prostate cancer. You have a negative KEL antigen, which means if you get a blood transfusion twice, you might develop a transfusion reaction. So as we discuss these things, we look at probabilities and prevalence. We think about what issues I may have, and meeting with my primary care physician about wellness, what testing should I have done, and that sort of thing. And then the interesting aspect of this is all public, is that, of course, my 16-year-old daughter's boyfriends can all look at it and say, possible life mate or not? And of course, the consent process was quite interesting because these PGP-10 had agreed to reveal their entire medical histories and their entire genomic interpretation, regardless of what it showed. I mean, luckily for me, no mental health issues yet.
Only 5% of the way there. Right?
That's right. And nothing that I would consider embarrassing or such things that might diminish my stature in the community or result in my loss of employment. But this is an evolving science. We're being very public about it. And I think part of the whole adventure is we're learning together, we're understanding the science, we're figuring out how in the future, people okay? How in the future patients will be informed by their geneticists and their doctors about this stuff. But for example, if you were told you have a 20% increased chance of colon cancer, you say, oh my God, 20%, that sounds horrible. Oh, the incidence of colon cancer in someone your age group is less than 1%. Oh, okay. It's really 1.2% when you think of the increased chance of cancer. So all of that kind of communication has been the interesting aspect of this.